Well, thank you so much, Marco, for joining us. It's coming up for about 7:30 at night here on Wednesday in Sydney, and Marco, I believe it's around 11:30 in the morning for you. So I think we've
Yeah,
finally
that's
done
it.
the
Close to
right we've
noon.
done the right thing by you this time. You're always up all sorts of hours for us. So thank you so much, mate, for the opportunity just for a quick chat around FireDAC for our developer direct customers all around Australia Pacific. So I guess I just wanted to start with by asking, we made the acquisition for FireDAC at the start of the year. What was the driver or the need for looking at FireDAC, and why do we sort of take that approach?
Basically, if we start from the beginning, Delphi has been uh, a very good tool for client-server development. I mean, client-server has been one of the foundations of Delphi, and originally it was built around the BDE. When the company started to look for alternatives to the BDE in terms of flexibility, scalability in the database access, and also the potential ability to go to different platforms than Windows, um, the Delphi introduced DB Express. That was in Delphi 6 timeframe, and alongside there was Kylix, and then there was like a way of get DB Express working on the .NET world as well. There was a complete revamp or redesign of DB Express around Delphi 2007, and that showed a lot of promise because this introduced the ability to have drivers written in Pascal rather than this DLL, compiled DLLs for which you get no source code. That are kind of black boxes that hook to the databases. But what happened is that there wasn't enough effort to keep pushing the technology and investing on it and extending it, while at the same time, other third parties, including AnyDAC, were actually pushing the same idea, the same approach to much more, to be much more feature complete, much more uh, fast in terms of data access and data management, and really adding a lot of features. So at that point, and that was actually before I joined the company, but that's a discussion that I have had with um, Mike Swindell and some of the other product managers before I joined. I was kind of pushing to say, hey, either you put a lot of investment on DB Express because it's okay, it works, but it should be, we need to have a great technology for data access in the product, not just a nice, good working technology. And so either you put a lot of effort or you look around and there are actually a couple of companies that are actually doing pretty well. And so eventually the decision was in terms of quality of the code and in terms of having a solution in a short time frame. The decision eventually was to acquire what we consider the best solution out there. That's AnyDAC, um, we that we have now rebranded as FireDAC.
Mm.
It's a nicer solution on many counts. I mean, speed, the fact you have the full source code. I mean, yeah, we ship the source code for the client dataset, but that's in C, and if you look at it, it's like a complete mess. And we don't ship source code for the database driver. So suppose you have a problem with the database driver, like a data type mismatch or something. I mean, it happens. You are stuck. You have to wait for us to deliver a new DLL, and also the fact that you have to deploy those DLLs to the various platforms, and there are different DLLs for Windows, Mac, and the DLLs have a problem on iOS. I mean, all of this creates quite a few issues. On FireDAC, you have the complete source code. You have the source code of the in-memory table structure. You have the source code of the physical drivers, and it's all written in Delphi. So that's alone is a great solution. But speed, features, and the overall quality make it for a very very nice solution for the future of Delphi
Yeah,
data
absolutely.
access.
It's interesting you make that point too about the acquisition versus building something. I think that there's a lot in that too. That if we would have sort of gone out and built yet another solution, that would mean a whole bunch more customers would have to sort of look at a new technology as well, and we not only just sort of not supporting any DAC customers as well. So it's a nice solution in that it's already well known in the market, People are using it already, so they don't have to learn any new things. So really, I guess it's helping educate our BDE customers and our DBX customers or DB Express customers on how they can take advantage of FireDAC. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, yeah, it's a proven solution. It's not something that you have to build and you have to test and you have to make sure it's done right. It's a proven solution, and also the other thing that by acquiring the solution, Dmitry Arefiev, which is the original author, is now working for us, and he is. I mean, I've met lots of people who know database, but he has an in-depth knowledge of all of the various details of the technologies that each of the major database vendors has implemented. He can compare like solutions from Oracle to Microsoft SQL Server to SQLite to MySQL to Interbase to Firebird to a bunch of others. I mean, he really knows, has a tremendous knowledge of behavior of the databases in the various scenarios, and of course has code that works against those and takes advantage of that knowledge.
Oh, that's fantastic. And the fact that he works for us means I have yet another person I can email for technical questions, which is excellent. So,
Yeah, that's a win-win situation for
absolutely.
customers, for us, and I was actually very pleased that this deal went through, and that was just kind of the first thing I did when I joined. I mean, the deal was already shaped, but I kind
Mhm.
of helped finalizing the deal and closing it.
Oh, fantastic. So I guess for our existing customers that haven't used AnyDAC or FireDAC now, is there a big difference for them as far as how they connect to their data? Is there a big learning curve for these guys in how they would work with the technology?
Sorry, there was some problem with the audio. I haven't
Oh, sorry,
fully
mate. Um,
understood the
oh,
question. Yeah.
okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay, Marco.
Not terribly well, I have to
Oh,
say.
okay. Let me just turn this up a little bit. Let me just see. Okay, let me get a little bit closer. My microphone is working. If I ask the question again of whether or not it's how difficult would it be for an existing BDE or DB Express customer to start using FireDAC? Is there a steep learning curve for them?
Overall, it's really very close to what a Delphi developer expect from database components. So it's quite intuitive to use FireDAC as it has been quite intuitive to use Delphi datasets in general. It's certainly easier and closer in terms of development model, in terms of properties, in terms of behavior to the BDE than it is to DB Express. So for example, here you can see a very simple FireDAC application. This has a connection which has some configuration that's tied to a driver and ties to a database. So it acts like the database component in the BDE or the SQL connection in DB Express. And then what you can do, you can have either a query or a table object. The table processing, that live table view lets you actually have table even if the data behind is actually quite large, so even for large tables. But in this simple case, I have a query and have SQL property again identical to a BDE query with some very simple SQL. And not only, I mean, this looks like just a string list editor, but actually if you double click, you get a full-blown editor for the query. For example, you can pre-execute the query and have a look at the result. So you can actually get information about the query and the data structure and potentially other information from the database. Can handle parameters, macros, bunch of different mapping options. So again, yeah, it looks like identical, but then you immediately see that there are lots of features, lots of capabilities that are built into like a simple component like a query. So again, this is just a query, hooked it up. You can just open the query and if you have a data source and the DB grid connected, you're up and running. The query component, as like any data set in FireDAC, has got full caching support, and so you can actually enable cached updates. Again, another property very similar to the BDE counterpart, but it has full caching, so it already embeds an in-memory data set. You can have the in-memory data set as a separate component. It's called AD table, and this lets you have an in-memory data set that is not physically tied to a data source, to a query, to a table. You can combine different sources and just populate this memory table, which behaves very similarly to a client data set, but is not required. It's an option. At times it's very handy. It's actually much faster than the client data set, but it's not required because a query or a table already has a sort of in-memory table embedded into itself.
Okay, so if we consider sort of things like the T-SQL query in DB Express, which is unidirectional, and you've sort of got to hook it up to the provider and then a client data set to sort of make it a little bit more easier to work with, we don't have those hassles with FireDAC, do we? Because of that caching and so on. Is that
No,
correct?
exactly not. So in fact, what I did, I've just created very small. This is kind of the classic DB Express application. So there is a connection. Let me actually hook it up. There is a query inside the comment property of the client of the data set. But then I have to hook a provider and a client data set if I want to have something have something visual. By contrast, if I use FireDAC, I still need a connection with properties that are somehow similar, but then I can just drop in the query as I showed earlier, and actually I need an AD query. And at that point, I could connect the data source straight to the query. So it's actually easier in terms of development, but you still have the full control. You still have the same capabilities, the in-memory table with the updates that you can send immediately, or you can cache the updates and then do an apply update operation later on. So you're not really losing any of the benefits of and the flexibility of the DB Express architecture, but the code becomes much easier and very similar to the original BDE kind of coding style.
Absolutely, yeah.
So here, for example, what we'll have to do is just to configure a connection. We can pick a driver interface, and then all we'll have to do at minimally. Hey, I still have the folder here. Just to employee GDB. Oh, actually, there is another thing I could have done, which was test the connection. Oh, yeah, of course, I need sysdba. So yeah, I can actually test the connection. Again, there are a lot of options you can use to change how the behavior of the database, the behavior of the type mapping, and really lots of other features. Another very nice is this info page that lets you see which database you're connected to, which DLL library you're actually using,
Wow.
the server version. I mean, a lot of details about what's going on, which drivers, which connections, and that's something very valuable. For example, like on Interbase, we ship multiple versions. We ship Interbase to go. We ship the full version. So here you can actually exactly see what's being hooked, which driver is being connected, and which behavior you're going to get. And
Mm.
also you can have full scripting. You can just start running scripts and do operations. So yeah, I mean,
That's really
I
quite.
haven't even put in a table. Just select star from employee under the connection, and I connect. Oops, I hit the wrong button. select select star from employee within the connection, and it is a bit tricky. Yeah. Wait. Oh, I did it. Did a foolish thing.
Nah, wrong edit
This is
field.
where you write the code. Okay, yeah, wrong input. And oh, okay, again, we need. Um, I should have disabled the login password, but anyway, master key. And so now we get some information from the table.
No,
So
that's
again, it's fully integrated. You have lots of capabilities that are tied to the component that you hook to the database and do testing operations and whatever.
I mean that's
And
very
now that we have the connection, yeah, we don't even have to hook in the query. The query automatically hooks to the connection if it finds one. So again, we need um, to write the SQL here. And again, rather than this plain code editor, I can actually double click on it and get like a full-blown features. Select star from employee. Let's get for a classic. Again, we can execute it locally. Okay, and see the result. If that's okay, we just accept it. Now this is our query, and now all we have to do is to open it up and hook the data source to the query, and we are basically getting the same grid with the same information. Just to prove it, what's happening, it just disabled this one. I mean, this is now disconnected. It's not active, but we have the data through the other connection. So we have two components rather than four. We have something that's very similar to the BDE, very standard for Delphi developers, um, kind of quite easy to pick up.
yeah. I mean that's fantastic, and I mean all those features around the connection information. I mean that really combines stuff that comes from the Data Explorer and the IB console as well. It's extremely comprehensive. I've got to say.
Yeah, there is also a menu that's added. So there is actually a full-blown Explorer that you can use. It's a separate application. It's a standalone separate app that you can use to explore connections. It's based on an initialization file that has the configuration, more or less like it happens on DB Express. That configuration file is not required. You can just customize the connection as I've done, providing the path and the database information. But of course, if you're using the same databases over and over, it's nice to have the connection configured. So this is the standalone tool. I don't might have not really be properly configured as it is now. Um, but you drop in a new connection. Again, it's very similar to the other page we have inside the IDE. When you have the new connection, you can browse data, you can run scripts, you can use you can test the database and how the database behave, even without opening the Delphi IDE, because it's a completely separate tool that like to manage the connections.
Now,
Might
just on that.
have a connection definition file somewhere, but yeah. And the other thing you get here is actually also valuable is a monitor. So you can have external monitoring of the entire traffic that goes to the connection, like more or less like the SQL monitor in DB Express. But in that case, it's a component you have to plug in, while here is just a parameter in the connection that enables monitoring. And on the other, so it's more similar to the BDE that has this separate standalone monitor application that you could use to see the comments being sent from the application to the DB and the data being fetched.
Now, I noticed on that first example that you had up, some sort of physical driver component.
Yeah, this is actually required. Let me reopen that one. Save change, yes. So what happens is that you have a bunch of, I mean, when you configure a connection, you indicate which driver you want to use, but then you need to have that proper driver source code compiled into your application. If you don't do so, it will get a very obvious error message saying there is a missing driver. So if we look at the drivers, if we go for FireDAC links, these are all of the physical drivers. So we have a physical driver for Oracle, for DB2, for Microsoft SQL Server, an ODBC gateway, and Microsoft Access, and so on. So these are all of the physical drivers. And what you basically have to do, you have to drop one of these components down into an application. Now, the reason you need this component to be dropped down is because you need to include the unit of the driver. So potentially, you could drop this component down, save the project. Now that you have the unit, you can actually remove the component, and everything will work. The component has a couple of options, like you can customize the vendor library, for example, pick the DLL to be used to hook to the, but mostly it's mostly useless. You just drop it there and let it there. You need only one for the entire application, of course. But again, the most important thing that this will trigger the inclusion of the proper unit. Now, when you're using, so this is physical interface driver. When you use DB Express, the same thing happens. I mean, you need to get a proper unit, but there is a technology in Delphi that lets you automatically add a unit when you pick the driver. We might want to go that way with FireDAC as well in the future. So it's just, but honestly, it's not bad to have the component that kind of reminds you which connection you have and let you pick some of the further properties. Of course, you can have like 5 connections. I mean, if the same application is able to talk to Oracle, to Interbase, to Microsoft SQL Server, just drop all of these connections, all of these drivers, and you drop also corresponding connections, and then you enable the right connection at runtime to talk with the proper database.
Oh, so you've just stolen my next question. So thanks for that. That was good. So my next question was going to be, you know, how easy is it then to switch between different database platforms? So it sounds like it's very simple as well.
It is reasonably easy. It's certainly easier than most other solutions. I mean, on one side, yeah, you just have to drop in these driver links and configure the proper connection. That's something you could honestly do in a very similar way also on DB Express and BDE and other systems. But now the difference is that there are several issues that will become problems when it's not like a trivial one-table application, but when an application becomes a complex application. For example, one of the issues that often affect developers is that when you're using a connection, you have specific data mapping rules. So you have, for example, floating point numbers are usually cause quite a few troubles because there are different databases that represent the real or floating point numbers in different ways. So some of them might declare like 10 values with 2 decimals, others have different representations. And what happens is that depending on these representations, you might end up having different field objects in the Delphi side of things. So for example, you could declare persistent fields, because that's nice to have in your data sets. But then when you move from like Oracle to Microsoft SQL Server, the persistent field end up being of the wrong type. And you're stuck. You can use persistent fields, which are nice to use. You have to go to dynamic fields. What FireDAC allows you to do in this configuration is you can change the data mapping. You can determine that even if the declared type is a given type, it can be mapped to a different internal type in Delphi. You can do mapping to currency in a custom way. You can do mapping to specific field types for floating point numbers, and also decide how to handle BCD types and a few other related features. So by managing these mappings, what you can do, you can end up in a situation where even if the database has slightly different representations, and Delphi by default will map it to different field types, you can force it to have a shared and common field type. This can be done at the connection level, so that you can have 2 connections with different rules for 2 different databases, but a single executable, but also at the individual query level. So you might have a specific query that touches a specific field type, and again, you can customize these data mapping rules. You can customize BCD handling and string type handling and other information at the query level. So a specific query touching a strange table might need like extra mapping. The other thing that's very relevant in terms of cross database is that the SQL that you write in this, well, actually, let me get back to the nicer editor. The SQL you write here um, can actually use macros and can even use conditional compilation. So you might have like a situation where on Oracle, to have the SQL query optimized, you might have to use a different keyword. I mean, when you look into like joins, there are databases that prefer having the left inner join or something written slightly
Mm.
different. So you can have an if Oracle add this other small bit to the query without having to have two different SQL components or dynamically encode, change the SQL. And also for functions, like suppose you want to have like use some date function or some numeric function. Different databases have different function names, but FireDAC has a way to map a single function name to properly to the given databases using this function macros and other features. So again, you can really have to the point that you have a single source, single SQL that is mapped slightly differently to different database from a single application. So that's where it requires a little to learn. I mean, it's not easy for sure, but it's actually very, very powerful and something you had to set up manually, both on in DB Express or on the BDE.
Yeah, well, I mean, with all this flexibility comes a lot of complexity, but this is amazing stuff that we never had before, have we? I mean, it's very, very powerful
No, not built into Delphi.
technology.
Not well. Of course, it was available from third parties,
Yes.
like AnyDAP, but not into the product. And this is again, and this is part of the enterprise version of Delphi. So if you are at the enterprise level, you get it for free, along with all the other solutions that we haven't removed and we won't remove immediately. Well, we will remove the BDE, but
Mm.
not other solutions. Uh, so you get it extra if you're only on the professional version. You can still buy it separately without having to go to the enterprise. I mean, this is you can decide to spend a little less money and have professional with FireDAC on top of it rather
Mm.
than go enterprise.
Yeah, I mean, so we're really giving customers, the option there as well, which is a really good thing too. I think that's a great thing that we're able to do, is to provide an enterprise, but as an optional thing for our professional customers. So that's great. It's interesting as well. I noticed that the user interface stuff that we've been doing so far has been VCL based with things like data sources and so on. I guess the obvious question is, this does this work with FireMonkey itself, and does this
It it
work
it
cross
fully
platform?
works with FireMonkey. In fact, there is a small component that you use to pick a proper hourglass, and that component can already adapt to like VCL and FireMonkey. There are also a couple of internal dialog boxes in FireDAC. For example, you can have asynchronous operations rather than have an operation like a long query which blocks the user interface. You can spawn an asynchronous operation and you get a small dialog saying, oh, something is processing behind the scenes, and you can like stop it. And those small dialog boxes come in both FireMonkey and VCL flavor. The other thing that's already available in terms of FireDAC is the ability to use visual live bindings to hook dynamically and automatically hook a FireMonkey user interface. I mean, visual live binding can be used on the VCL side, but VCL
Mm,
developers are used to data-aware controls and tend to use those for
yes.
most of the time. But there is full support for FireDAC in live bindings because any T data set is supported. But we are certainly going to improve and have specific FireMonkey live binding support for FireDAC in the future.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Um, yeah, but this is actually, I think this is actually an example that does use live binding. In fact, it has a binding list that I think hooks to this table. The specific thing here is that we are looking at a FireDAC application, but as you can see from the forum, it's an iOS application.
Yeah,
So
well, I was going to just
FireDAC
ask.
is available.
Yeah, I was just going to ask
Yeah,
you.
FireDAC is available on iOS. Specifically in this case, in case I'm using the SQLite driver. And again, I have a FireDAC FMX weight cursor. Uh, of course, you can also use the interbase provider. We don't have support for other databases, but mostly because there is no client library. I mean, there's no Oracle client library on iOS. On iOS, the mechanism is you have to compile not just the driver, but the client library into the executable, which is what we do with interbase. The only exception is SQLite, because that's part of the platform SDK for iOS, and also happens to be the same driver used of the platform SDK on Android. So we kind of have a road paved for the future in that respect. So this is a very simple application. Connection, and the connection again is in this case an SQLite connection that hooks to, well, the database name here is going to be replaced at runtime with something that makes sense on the device. The code is quite simple. There is just I think it just hooks to a table that is called tasks. And then there are specific methods, specific queries for updating and deleting the
task
data.
data, I guess. Yeah.
So this does delete task or task name equal task name. This is a parametric query, and again, parameters actually handle. You don't have to open another window to handle the parameters. They're all in the same place. Very easy to manage within the query definition. And similarly, there is an insert operation that's available, and these are hooked to this button. There is an insert button. So what it basically does, it finds the parameter and executes. It does SQL and then refreshes the table. And again, this is hooked to the table is hooked to live binding. So let me see. Maybe I'm able to actually.
I mean, while you're doing
in the
that,
live binding designer. So it's quite straightforward. The text of the comes from the task name property field, and it says invalid because we don't have a design time connection to the database, so it doesn't. It's not 100% sure this is good, but it will work at runtime.
Yeah, I mean, and that code you showed earlier on, that looks very similar to DB Express code. I've been spending a lot of time doing that, so that's a nice little.
Yeah, actually, what I did,
as
I
well.
took the DB Express version of this demo and migrated it to FireDAC, trying to change as little as possible. And there was very little I had to change. I mean, it was
That's
really
good.
minimal change to migrate from the DB Express version to this FireDAC version. And just to prove this actually works, I should have Reflector working hooked to my physical device. Let me double check that it is actually showing. It should be. Oops, where is it gone? Okay. Should be a window hooked here. No, it isn't. That's odd. But I see it working from the device. I hate when it does that.
Yeah.
Okay, I have to do. Oh no, mirroring was off, so it was my fault.
Hang
Okay,
on, I
so
can see
this is
something coming up now.
my physical device visible through Reflector, and this is the iOS SQLite that uses the FireDAC behind the scenes. The behavior is identical to the version that used DB Express. The database is hooked and created at the very beginning, and then it's used. You can add a new task, like call home, and okay, that's added. You can, okay, I've done the email, delete the task, and that's gone. So yeah, it's a very simple application, one table, one field, but it shows the core ideas. And again, it can be implemented. Changed it to implement it using FireDAC from the original version that was based on DB Express.
Oh, that's excellent. Now, I've just noticed as well the components you've got there are sort of directly on the form, and we've traditionally used things like data modules. Yeah, that doesn't change using FireDAC at all.
No, no, not at all. I mean, that's still the preferred way of doing things.
Yeah.
But yeah, for simple and fast demos, it's nice to drop components straight away in the
Oh,
front end.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, it is certainly true that's the preferred way of doing things. And the approach is quite straightforward. I mean, it's really I mean, it's really a T data set design. It really integrates very nicely with the VCL or the FireMonkey architecture. It works at the runtime library level.
Mm.
Also, it's a very great solution in terms of backend for data snap. So if you have multi-tier application, you might want to use FireDAC to in the middle tier to actually talk to the database in the backend. So it
Okay.
fits into like all the various scenarios of data access that we have in Delphi.
Oh, fantastic. So that was one of my questions too. Was so there's no issue with this working with the data snap technology. FireDAC will just fit in nicely.
There is one one minor problem that is it's not that something doesn't work, but it's that this optimization, so something that could work slightly faster.
Hmm.
Uh, but it's a minor thing that we're going to fix as soon as
Okay.
possible in terms of server-side integration with the iProvider with the provider interface on DataSnap. Um, but there is already good integration for REST and other areas of DataSnap. But again, it can be used, it works, it's just could be better optimized.
Well, it's our very first release, so that's only going to get better over time. So
Yeah,
that's good. The
yeah.
fact that we
I mean, yeah, it's. I mean, there are some of the areas of the product that are that are still like not fully integrated because it was a recent acquisition and we're kind of busy to get the iOS support running that we didn't want really to merge too much code. But now what's going to happen real soon is complete integration. So there won't be in the future a separate installer for FireDAC or a separate release. Will just come in the product
yeah.
completely bound to the product. And some of the low and some of the global features, some of the support for like SQLite or some like databases is expected to be also in the professional version, not just to the FireDAC one or the enterprise one.
No, that's great. Yeah.
Like in memory tables, it's similar to what happens to the DB Express today. So
mm.
some of the core features will be shared, but then the real, I mean, enterprise database connectors will be part of the enterprise release or of the FireDAC
Mm.
at the impact.
Mm. I guess one other sort of obvious question as well, and I'm sure that our listeners, when they hear this on Friday, will want to know. Um, when it comes to DB Express, I mean, people probably won't. They'll start looking at FireDAC now, but probably won't migrate for a little while. Will we still support DB Express in sort of the next version or two? Will we still have those libraries?
We will support the DB Express for the next coming versions. We might keep that support like for like the long term. In terms of using the DB Express components, what we are investigating if there's a way to keep using the DB Express component, but basically replace the low-level drivers with actually FireDAC, so we don't have to maintain like two drivers for like the next version of Microsoft SQL Server or Oracle. So that's something that's on the table. But at the other time, what we are trying to do is mostly for the BDE, but also for DB Express, is release some tools, lots of documentation that really helps people migrate their code and move it over. So practical tools that convert some of your code, and lots of suggestion and help and indication of how to make that transition in a smooth way.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
ultimately, the goal is to move the code to use FireDAC natively, but we understand that at times, specifically with DB Express, I mean, it's hard to consider that on BDE because BDE has been deprecated like years and years ago.
Yes, I
But
know.
people have been using DB Express until yesterday. I mean, as the kind of major or the solution that comes in the box, which of course is a relevant solution.
Mm.
And again, it is working fine, and most people are saying, yeah, I can get extra speed with FireDAC, but honestly, the application works well enough. I've been able to work around the various issues and problems. I have a working app. Whether should I move it? So we are certainly considering keeping, again, the components at a higher level, the components as something that we bring forward to the future, but just removing some of the behind the scenes drivers and replace them with something that we trust and we want to focus on, which is the FireDAC drivers.
Mm.
I mean, it's not trivial. There's no promise that this will happen, but that's somehow the way we think uh, we would like to go forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, far out the fact that you've got some nice linkage as far as the component infrastructure to the BDE and the DB Express, but all these added benefits of performance, extra features and really in depth knowledge of each database platform, and the fact that it's working on VCL on FireMonkey for Windows, OS 10, and iOS. I mean, it's very very comprehensive, and we've only really had it in the product for one version. It's very
Yeah, and
exciting.
of course, I mean, if someone wants to get full advantage of the FireDAC features, he'll have to switch to the FireDAC components. I mean,
Yeah.
if we provide some sort of bridge from DB Express, that would really be only as a way to like keep existing code, but won't really allow you to get full benefit of the underlying structures.
Mm. But mate, Marco, this has been such a useful little interview. I think our listeners will certainly appreciate this really good information. I believe they'll also be very excited to hear about pending documentation. I know that we're all really busy right now, but certainly in the near future that details on migration and other ways of being able to move to FireDAC and what's going on. Certainly,
Yeah,
over here
there
as
is already a very detailed documentation as part of the what was AnyDAC. That's now it's part of our documentation on our documentation site.
up on
There's
the
actually
document.
already a lot in terms of steps for BD migration, but again, the goal is as soon as possible to have a more comprehensive and easier solution that will help people move their code forward, move the data, and move the code, like move the data from Paradox to
Mm,
Interbase and move the BDE code to FireDAC code.
yeah.
Again, given that there are lots of similarities in terms of properties, components, in terms of the overall approach, moving from BDE is actually relatively simple. Moving from DB Express is slightly more complicated because you have to decide if you want to keep the client dataset or actually drop it or potentially replace it with the
Mm,
AD mem, the FireDAC mem table. So there are like more options, more alternatives, and some like mismatches in the model in the way you write the code. So DB Express migration is slightly more complicated,
okay.
but it's certainly doable as well.
Mm, okay, well, that's great. And when you said that document, is that up on the doc wiki? Is it docwiki.embarcadero.com?
No, it's actually it's on the dock Embarcadero side. There is a
Oh, okay.
section,
Right.
FireDAC. We are migrating everything into DocWiki, but that's going to take a little time.
All right. Well, I'll
So
hunt
for now, it's in English only, and and
that.
the host is separate, but on dockembarcadero.com.
All right. I'll find that for our listeners, and I'll email that
Yeah,
during our session on Friday. So yeah. Well, Marco, thank you so much for your time today.
you're more than
Obviously,
welcome.
I guess the other very quick question is I'm sure that our Delphi user group community would be very keen to know if you would be interested in coming to Australia in the near future. Um,
I can't deny that I've been there and I've liked that a lot. It's a matter of arranging time and well, I guess business requirements and family requirements and everything. But yeah, I once was at I think it was about 5 years ago. I went to the ADUC meetings in Melbourne and Brisbane and really enjoyed a lot. I mean, too
oh,
bad that I spent like 6 days in
oh,
Australia. I
shame.
mean, probably should spend 6 months to get an idea of what it's like, but that's all I had. So 6 days of which four were working days, but whatever. I very 2 nice days off. One going in the mountains, in the forest, and the other just sunbathing and splashing in the ocean. So,
Oh, fantastic. Well, next time we'll have to bring the family over, and we'll try and arrange it.
well, yeah,
We'll
we'll
keep you
see.
busy.
We'll see if that works out.
Well, thank you so much, Marco. We really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day,
Okay,
and
thanks a lot.
appreciate it. And yeah, I'll talk to you soon, mate. Thanks heaps.
Okay, bye bye.
Thanks, Marco. Bye.